Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Welcome back. Let's go ahead and continue.
So, this is again not because sensory gratification is an inherently bad thing. Not at all. Indeed, any happiness we experience, even sensory pleasure, is a glimmer of the infinite happiness of the one we are seeking, of Brahman. But sensory pleasure is the most limited form of happiness, and one that easily leads to unhappiness when we do not get what we want.
Yes, because it's all dependent externally. It's dependent on external factors. So the happiness we want should not depend on anything.
Indeed, the Buddha referred to all temporary forms of happiness as being in truth a form of unhappiness, as suffering or dukkha in the First Noble Truth.
Wow, all forms of happiness? It's a form of unhappiness? I mean, that's pretty interesting. I guess because the fact that once the happiness goes away, it becomes unhappiness because you want it back, because it's temporary.
If we follow the scheme of the Purusharthas, we know that a more enduring happiness can be found if we work hard and achieve the means for enjoying the senses on a reliable and regular basis, by acquiring artha, which means power or wealth. In fact, this dual meaning of artha as both power and wealth is quite ingenious, as it conveys the idea that in this world, wealth is a type of power. If I have $1, I have the ability, the power, to acquire $1's worth of goods that can give me happiness. This is, of course, temporary happiness, and in today's world, what $1 will get you is not a
Nothing.
whole lot. Right? But if I have $100, I have 100 times more power to acquire what I want, and so on, and so on. The same problem, though, that attaches to sensory enjoyment also attaches to money and power. In the words of the famous phrase, you can't take it with you. Even the wealthiest person in the world is not able to carry that wealth into the next life, right? When you were born, you didn't have a bank account from your past life that was immediately transferred to your new self so you could keep on enjoying. No, it just does. You leave that, it's gone. In fact, I just quickly want to narrate something very wise that my grandfather said as he knew he was nearing his death. And he was suffering from a variety of health problems, and he was very involved in various businesses. And he was once asked by my mother, "What are you going to do with what's going to happen to all of that when you're gone?" And he said, "Well, it'll just go by the wayside like everything else." He wouldn't care. He wouldn't be there anymore. Someone else would have to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
You can't take it with you. Also, as we evolve in our spiritual journey across many lifetimes, we realize the happiness money can yield is, like sense pleasure itself, a temporary thing. Money and power have more utility than a single object of sense gratification because they can enable us to come into contact with many such objects. But at a certain point, we start to realize that the deeper longings of our being are simply not satisfied by material things at all. It is noteworthy in this regard that suicide rates tend to be the highest in parts of the world that are the wealthiest. We need something much greater than either sensory gratification or the means of acquiring it.
I've said this some time ago. I always wondered, it's like, why are these rich people doing so much drugs or committing these acts? It's like, you have money. How is it a problem? It didn't make sense. But as I got older, I can kind of understand a little bit. It's a bit difficult to understand when you don't have the same problems, but I can somewhat relate to it. Although I will say it's still difficult. Only because, poor people, or not rich people, let me put it that way. I don't think I'm necessarily poor, but we have different sets of problems. And the poor problems, or not rich people problems, is money. When they have money, then a lot of the money problems go away. But in terms of the not rich people, that is the problem. Rich people, on the other hand, has a completely different set of problems. And it's really weird when I start hearing people that they don't feel sympathy for rich people because they have money. they can literally get out of, well, they have power as well. He associated wealth and power because, when you're rich and famous, and being rich sometimes can make you famous a little bit, you can get out of a lot of things. A lot of small problems like having to pay a speeding ticket or any kind of fines in court is not a problem at all. But to someone who's not rich, that's a pretty big problem because, it's still money out of your pocket which you're already struggling in the first place. So, yeah, I've always, at one point I understood a little bit of the rich people problem, but I don't think I understood all that much. It's completely different. It seems like okay. It's a different problem. I had some understanding of it, but I'm sure it's barely anything at all. I'll keep it at that.
And when we can't conceive of anything beyond that, it is truly a desperate situation. Higher than both of these, in the traditional scheme of Purusharthas, and typically listed first, is dharma. In this context, dharma refers to duties toward others. Contrary to what our sense of alienation may compel us to believe, we are not alone in this world. We live amongst the myriad beings who are all manifestations of the same infinite reality, which is the source and essence of our own existence. True and lasting happiness is therefore not to be found in isolation. It involves the happiness of others as well. Even the solitary sage, who does withdraw from the world and seeks liberation alone on a mountaintop, nevertheless works for the good of all living beings. This work may manifest as an invisible influence on the world, but it is nevertheless real. Swami Vivekananda speaks of this when he says, quote, "The greatest men in the world have passed away unknown. Hundreds of these unknown heroes have lived in every country working silently. Silently they live and silently they pass away, and in time their thoughts find expression in Buddhas or Christs, and it is these latter that become known to us." As we continue to evolve in our spiritual journey, we start to realize the deep joy that arises from giving joy to others. And unlike material wealth, we start to realize that you can take the fruit of your good deeds, your dharmic actions, with you.
So interesting. So it looks like it's going through the steps of the 3 things that makes you happy. Materialistic things that you can buy with power or money, as he also says. 2 is finding a job, which he skipped so far. 3, which is the longer term of happiness for humans, which is doing things for other people. Swami Sarvapriyananda talks about these 3 things, but he does talk about the 4th, which is moksha, or enlightenment, discovering someone's true self, is the eternal happiness, or bliss. But in terms of the scientific community, and in terms of majority of people in the world, probably these 3 things really, well, obviously sticks out, and you just don't know about the 4th.
And now we come to karma, right? This is the popular concept of good karma. As we shall see, and contrary to popular misconceptions, good karma does not lead to God realization, at least not directly, though it can create the conditions in which realization can occur, such as being born into a spiritual family. But good karma does not lead by itself to true and lasting happiness. I encounter this misconception very often. People think you sort of build up a big pile of good karma and then it reaches a critical mass and pop, you're liberated. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. How does it work? Well, that's what we're going to understand, hopefully. So why does karma not by itself lead to this ultimate happiness? This is because the good that comes from doing good from dharma is also bound by time. It's temporary. It lasts longer than material pleasures, but it's still temporary. This is something the sages of the Upanishads realized long ago, and it's why we find criticism of various rituals that are meant to lead to finite goods, such as rebirth in heaven, in texts like the Mundaka Upanishad and the Bhagavad Gita. They basically say, yes, if you perform this ritual in the right way, it'll give you this particular fruit, and by the way, that is utterly worthless if you're looking for moksha. Right? It's very clear about that. It's not that good karma and the works that produce it are bad, any more than sensory objects and wealth are bad. Right? None of these things are bad. They're all manifestations of the infinite. They're not inherently evil, but they are finite. So attachment to them produces at best finite happiness, which means you also get a lot of unhappiness. In order to experience the results of good actions...
Oh, real quick. So the things he's pointing about these finite happiness, and then we'll get a lot of unhappiness out of it. I think if you can find a way to get happiness, but then not receive the unhappiness afterwards, that's something that I might have achieved. I'm not saying it's 100%, but I find happiness in a lot of things in this world, but I don't really get unhappiness afterwards. Don't get me wrong, I do get unhappiness, but it's not necessarily from receiving happiness. It's usually obviously the problems that we have. I get some unhappiness from it, some I understand that I don't get unhappiness from it, but I generally don't get unhappiness from happiness of things that I've done, even if it goes wrong, because the way I look at it, it's like a problem to be solved, and I enjoy solving problems for the most part. So, for example, you fix something and it breaks, you're like, oh my gosh, why is it broken? And generally, you fixing it makes you happy, but then when it breaks, it makes you unhappy. But for me, it's like, oh man, I didn't do it right. Interesting. Let me figure it out. So it's not a unhappiness, but a more of a, ooh, I didn't do it right. What did I do wrong? It's a learning opportunity. It's an opportunity to fix my mistake, for one thing, and to learn what I did wrong, to learn the right way to do it. Not necessarily thinking that I did it the right way the first time. It's like, oh, so that wasn't the solution. What is the solution? That's the way I look at problems, especially when you try to fix something and it breaks. I don't look at it as like, oh my gosh. I do sometimes. But most of the time, if it's nothing that serious, I don't tend to, it doesn't tend to cause me suffering. Most things don't tend to cause me suffering. Some things do. And obviously I still have to work on that.
We have to keep acting again and again and again. It's only with the fourth Purushartha, the fourth goal of life, moksha or liberation, that one experiences a joy which is infinite and unending, in the realization of our own true nature, which we have forgotten through being trapped in the shell of our egoistic individuality. So this is the problem that we're in. So now, at last, we come to the four yogas. How then do we reach moksha? How do we achieve God realization? The realization of our true infinite self, which has manifested in the form of our limited individuality. First, as we were just saying, realization is not a result of action. Again, good karma does not lead to it, at least not directly. If realization were the product of action, it would be limited, as all products of action are. You would do the thing that brings moksha, and you'd have moksha for a while, and then you'd have to do it again. Right? You would have to keep doing whatever you did to achieve it in order to sustain it. It would not be the lasting happiness which it in fact is. It would simply be a more refined version of good karma. And if you look at the life story of the Buddha, this is what he discovered in the course of his journey. Many practices that led to very refined states of consciousness, but they had to be repeated in order for that experience to keep happening. Secondly, if realization is not a result of action, and this I think is the most radical thing I'm going to say today, this means that we literally can do nothing to achieve it. To refer again to the Taoist tradition, the sage Lao Tzu recommends something called Wu Wei, which literally means doing nothing. Now, this isn't just sitting and doing nothing. As Lord Krishna points out in the Bhagavad Gita, it's literally impossible to do nothing. Particularly as beings who identify with physical bodies, we find that even if we try to be very, very still, we nevertheless continue to breathe, our bodily processes continue to operate, and similarly our minds continue to be active even if we sit still. It takes great effort to still the mind, a process which the Gita compares to taming the wind. Even the Lord himself, the Infinite One, acts constantly to uphold the world, a process called lokasangraha, right? The upholding of our existence.
I think the reason why, actually, I just thought about this. I don't know if anyone else has said it, but I'm guessing the reason why the mind's hard to tame because the mind is there to help you stay alive. So it has to think about everything. Anything that's going to happen to you at all that will cause you unhappiness, that will cause you suffering in any way, shape, form, or fashion, your mind's going to be thinking about it. And you trying to stop your mind from keeping you alive is kind of hard. Alive meaning that at least, or not suffering as well. So if you have like a bill tomorrow, your mind's gonna say, "There's a bill tomorrow. There's a bill tomorrow. There's a bill tomorrow." It's not gonna stop for the most part, of course.
Doing nothing, then, does not mean literally doing nothing. As Lord Krishna explains in the 3rd chapter of the Gita, it means acting without a sense of doership, acting with detachment. We still appear to be acting, but that agent is gone. It is realizing that it is the Infinite One who is in fact the doer of all action. All that occurs in all the myriad universes of existence is the action, the manifestation of the only one who in the end really does exist, the Infinite Brahman. Even the Infinite Brahman, when we remove this veil of time, space, and causation, is not in fact acting, because once you remove that veil, there's nothing happening at all. It is just pure infinity. But I'm speaking within this realm. All action, everything, is the action of the infinite. To act without that sense of doership, not out of attachment to the fruits of one's actions, out of a desire for temporary happiness, but for the good of all beings, is to surrender one's sense of doership to the divine reality, to step aside and let the Divine Mother, the Tao, the Infinite Brahman, work through us. Right? In the words of St. Francis of Assisi, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." We become an instrument of God. To quote from the Star Wars films, "Let the Force flow through you." Or to paraphrase the Apostle Paul, "It is not I who acts, but Christ who acts through me." This surrender of one's sense of doership and of allowing the Infinite One to work through us is thus central to the process of attaining realization and liberation, and brings us very close to the answer to our question, what makes the 4 yogas work? Recall that at the fountainhead of the process by which the One manifests as the many, as all of us myriad beings, is the phenomenon of individuation, the arising of the ahankara, the ego. It is this ego that gives rise to our sense of individuality, this wonderful individuality that enables us to see reality from a unique perspective and to cultivate the special gifts which we can in turn give back to the world. But it is the same individuality which, if we remain caught up in it, if we become attached to it, alienates us from others and from our true self and gives rise to all our suffering. The 4 yogas work. Here's the answer, right? The 4 yogas work by attenuating, by reducing this sense of individuality. When we are egotistical, if we're caught up in our individual desires without regard for others, and see ourselves as being cut off from the rest of existence or as standing above it, our ego, we can say, is opaque. The light of the infinite reality that is its true source is getting through to us only dimly, like sunlight concealed by a thick black smoke. But as we open the ego to others and to the infinite, as we let it unfold like a flower, it starts to become translucent. More and more light comes in. We feel an increasingly sustainable sense of happiness and real joy in our lives, even in the midst of unfortunate circumstances. And when the ego becomes completely transparent, such that there is no visible barrier whatsoever between I, the individual, and I, the infinite, then realization has been achieved. The One shines through like the sun on a clear and bright day, until eventually it is all that we see and all that we are. The 4 yogas function to achieve this very translucency and ultimate transparency of the ego. Swami Vivekananda sees these yogas not as mutually exclusive, but as mutually affirming. There are 4 yogas, and not only one, to suit 4 basic personality types: emotional, intellectual, active, and contemplative. And each of us is some mix of all 4 of those. In Swamiji's own words, quote, "We classify the yogas in the following way under 4 heads. Karma yoga, the manner in which a man realizes his own divinity through works and duty. 2, bhakti yoga, the realization of the divinity through devotion to and love of a personal God. Raja yoga, the realization of the divinity through the control of the mind. And 4, jnana yoga, the realization of a man's own divinity through knowledge."
Wait.
And 4, jnana yoga, the realization of the divinity through the control of the mind.
Raja Yoga. Oh, yeah, okay.
And 4, jnana yoga,
Okay.
the realization of a man's own divinity through knowledge.
Okay. I always go karma, bhakti, jnana, and then raja. He swapped raja and naya. That's why I was like, wait. I wanted to say about the bhakti yoga. I'm wondering if that's if it's at all possible, or if anyone ever thinks about bhakti yoga as in not necessarily the love of a personal god, but perhaps maybe the love of life or people. Perhaps life is a good one, as opposed to God. Love of life. Yes, love of life. Now that I think about it, because I've always said bhakti yoga as in I don't believe in bhakti yoga as in love of a personal god or God in general, but I do say humans, people, or now that I think about it, maybe life. Now, if you ask me the question, well, do you eat meat? Then it's like, well, yes, I do. So how do you love life? It's like, well, I just because I eat meat, I eat it to survive. Now we are omnivores, so therefore we do both eat meat and plant. I don't. How do I say this? You need a balanced diet to survive, and if you eat only strictly certain things, you need to macronutrients. So it's a lot, especially if you're, well, it's how to say poor, but obviously there are certain cultures who eat like are vegetarians, but their diet kind of fits into their lifestyle because that's the way their diet has always been, versus where my diet has always been omnivorous. Where it's always been a mix, and switching completely off without knowing what is kind of right. Don't get me wrong, information is online and everything, but it's just I do not have time for all of this. So the whole point is just the fact that while yes, the love of life, but I understand that when I eat meat, I don't eat it because I hate the animal or I just want to kill the animal. I eat it because it sustains my life. In much the same way that if an animal were to eat me. So it's a mutual respect type thing. If an animal kills me and just leaves me to rot, well, the plants will have me anyway. But, understand if you eat for the purposes of living, as long as you don't let the animal suffer. I think that being the most important case is that you don't let it suffer. That's my justification.
I firmly believe that if Swami Vivekananda were speaking today, he would have spoken of human beings, humanity. He uses the term man because that's how people spoke and wrote in the 1890s. So give him a break. He's talking about all of us, right?
Yeah, just man. It's all like a lot of male terminology is kind of a blanket statement nowadays. So like you say, I'm going out with the boys, that just means you're going out with your friends, generally speaking.
We don't need to cancel Swami Vivekananda, right? Because he said man, right? Ultimately, there are, according to Swami Vivekananda, as many yogas as there are individual beings seeking liberation. We can think of the 4 yogas as 4 clusters of practices, and the yoga of each individual as a highly specific combination of these practices, unique to the individual personality. The classification of the yogas as 4 in number is thus a matter of convenience, done for the sake of typology. It's not meant to be restrictive, to imply that there are 4 and only 4 ways to realize God, nor are the yogas to be seen as mutually exclusive. Right? We need a convenient number. If we say there are infinite yogas, we say, okay, that doesn't help me, I'm overwhelmed. Right? If we say there's only one, well, now I'm fanatical, like everybody has to do the same thing. 4 is, good, with that kind of asterisk. Among the 4 yogas, Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga, the yogas of meditation and knowledge, respectively, can sound quite similar, given that both are focused on the mind. The approach of Jnana Yoga, however, is cognitive, the elimination of false identifications of the self, such as with the body or the mind, aimed at giving rise to the certain knowledge, jnana, that the Atman, the self, and Brahman are one. The approach of Raja Yoga is, one could say, more phenomenological. We still our thoughts with the aim of directly realizing our divine nature through the experience of samadhi. In Jnana Yoga, we use the mind to go beyond the mind by negating our dualistic mental constructs. In Raja Yoga, we restrain the mind and still it with the aim of experiencing that which is beyond it. In both these practices, the ego is attenuated. Jnana Yoga does this through its intellectual deconstruction of the ego, the process of neti neti, I am not this, I'm not that. Raja Yoga does this by quieting the ego, removing one's attention from it. For attention adds fuel to the waves of the mind, stilling the vibrations of the mind and simply allowing the true self to shine through. That is how Raja Yoga accomplishes its goal. This is what the sage Patanjali means when he defines this form of yoga as chitta vritti nirodha, the calming of the waves of the mind. If we attain realization through these methods, we may experience it as an awakening to our own true self, a recovery of an identity that was only apparently lost, but that was in fact there all along. As the Zen tradition teaches, we were always enlightened, we were always free, we just didn't know it yet. Bhakti Yoga, on the other hand, melts the ego, as it were, in divine love.
Actually, I'm going to pause it right there because I think that's a good next starting point. Bhakti Yoga. Okay. So, I don't think I have too much to say in this one, but ego, as it were, divine love. So, again, Bhakti Yoga, the way I look at it, it's not through personal God. I look at, I don't know if it's right or wrong, or let me say it, I don't know if it's wrong. I don't know, because obviously I don't know if it's right, but I just don't know if it's wrong. But the way to look at Bhakti Yoga, which is the way I choose to and want to look at it, is more of the love of life or the love of people. But life more preferably, because I don't hate animals, but obviously I do eat them. Not all of them, obviously. And but the thing is, though, it's not to let the animal suffer. So, I mean, you can say that's if you wish to say it's a contradiction, that's fine, but that's how I justify it, as in, obviously, we need to eat to survive, and you can say that, you know, you can be vegetarian to survive. I would try it for sure. I mean, I've gone through a couple, maybe a month's probably the longest where I've gone through without eating any meat. It's not because I chose to, it's because of a particular reason. There's a reason for it. It wasn't because I was unhealthy or an issue with it or anything like that. It's just because of the food that I just had available at the time. So again, you know, but the biggest thing for me is obviously is that the animals are not necessarily treated cruelty, because I mean it's kind of hard whenever they live kind of cramped up, but the things though, it might be better than the wild, because I think most of these animals might maybe the cows can't live in the wild. I don't know if chickens can or can't. I'm not sure. I've heard there's an animal that's been so domesticated that it cannot get introduced back into the wild at all, because it would not know what to do. It'll just do what it normally does, but if there's any threat whatsoever, it can't do anything. I think that's the cow. Anyways, that's the end of this part. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, and sign down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.